Hey, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Susan Holtzman, and I am the president and CEO of NAMI Miami-Dade County, and we're really excited to have you with us this evening. We have a great presentation tonight in recognition of Pride Month, so we're very excited to be able to offer this topic, and we know that this is kind of a specialized topic that doesn't get talked about that much. And that's what we like to do at NAMI is talk about those things that people don't talk about enough. So um, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just everyone who's on the call that attended our walk uh, last in May, thank you for being there. If you didn't attend it, mark your calendars. Well, we don't have a date yet, but make sure that you're there next year because it's a really amazing, fun, fulfilling, uplifting kind of day, and we would love to have you all there. I just do also want to do one other quick plugs, and you're going to be getting plugs throughout the presentation, throughout the evening, really through our chat. But coming up in August, we have our Pathways to Hope conference, and that's going to be August 21st and 22nd. And that conference really looks at the connection between faith and mental health and how faith and mental illness can be addressed together, because there's some perceptions that there's a disconnect between living a life of faith and getting treatment for mental illness. So our Pathways to Hope conference is a 2-day conference that brings together faith leaders, the community, scholars, and it's a great couple of days, and we hope that you can join us for that. We're really excited tonight to welcome Melissa Cruz. Melissa is a licensed mental health counselor, LMHC, practicing in South Florida, Bucks County Counseling Care. She received her master's mental health counseling degree from the University of Miami and a bachelor's in psychology from Florida International University. She spent the last 10 years studying psychology and mental health, and she's a member of Psi Chi, the National Honor Society in Psychology. She's born and raised in Miami, so Melissa's local. She's bilingual and has experience working with adults, adolescents, families, and groups. She's worked with clients to address a variety of mental health concerns, including depression, anxiety, sexuality, and gender identity issues, addiction, family relations, life transitions, and immigration trauma, which is why we thought she'd be the perfect speaker for us to have tonight. Her therapeutic approach is culturally competent and trauma informed. And she, as we mentioned, she's currently a therapist at Bucks County Counseling Care, working with adults and couples, and is certified in dialectical behavior therapy, otherwise known as DBT. So thanks so much. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Susan. I am so excited to be here and to talk with all of you tonight about coming out in mental health. And yeah, let's have a great night and hopefully you learn something new. So tonight, as Susan mentioned in her kind introduction, we're going to be talking about the coming out process and mental health, really understanding the emotional journey that happens for folks who are involved in this process or going through this process. My name is Melissa. My pronouns are she and they. And I'm really excited to be here. I hope that you learned something new and you walk away with some new information or even some more questions, some curiosity that helps you seek new information. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about kind of four main topics. We're going to start with understanding and exploring the different facets of identity when it comes to sexuality and gender. We're going to talk about the coming out process and how this is a lifelong process. It's not a single moment. And we're going to be talking also about mental health, all the way from the individual through the system and what that looks like at every point in the process. And I really am also going to talk about as a therapist, coping skills, support systems are very important for mental health. And so that is what we are going to end with today, because I want you to walk away not feeling overwhelmed by all this information that we're going to learn today, but really with some relevant tools and strategies. I also wanted to mention that throughout the talk, I will be using the term LGBTQIA plus or LGBT plus or LGBTQ. And this is a universal acronym that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer and questioning, intersex, and asexual. And the plus at the end represents all of the diverse orientations, gender identities, and characteristics that are not specifically captured by those letters. I personally feel comfortable using the term queer, but not everyone does. And so it's really important to check in with folks, with whoever you're talking to, about what individual term they feel comfortable with. Because in the past, that term queer has had a very long, complex history. It's been used as a slur, a derogatory slur. And in recent years, it's been reclaimed by the community. And so really it depends on culture, on context, on generations, because for some people, they still find that word offensive and hurtful. I'm going to use all of these terms interchangeably throughout the presentation, throughout the talk today, but it is in the acknowledgement of all the identities that may not be captured by a specific term or individual letters. It's really representing all the identities that we're going to talk about today. So moving on to our first topic, we're going to be talking a lot about identity. Before we even jump into the coming out process, it's really important to understand what all these terms mean. And for some of you, this might be new information. For others, this might be topics and terms that you're very comfortable with. But I want to make sure that we're all kind of starting off on the same page. And when we're talking about identity, it's very important to know that everyone has a sexual identity, a gender identity. Not only members of the LGBTQ plus population or community have a gender identity or sexual identity. And so all of these terms, maybe you can even learn a little bit more about yourself throughout this process, whether or not you identify as part of the community. So when we're talking about biological sex, these are physical sex characteristics that are assigned or observed at birth, right? And some of the categories that we see here in this area are male, female, or intersex. When we're talking about gender identity, this is a person's internal sense of gender. How do I feel about my own gender? And then later we're going to talk a little bit about expression and what that looks like. But for gender identity, we might use labels or words such as transgender, which is someone who their gender identity is different than what they were assigned at birth, right? Their gender identity is different than their biological sex. We might use the term non-binary, which is an umbrella term for gender identities that fall outside of the male or female binary. And folks that are part of the non-binary community may identify as not having a gender, having multiple genders, having a fluid gender that changes over time. And we can also think about cisgender, which would be someone whose biological sex and gender identity correspond, right? They match. So talking about gender identity, this is how someone presents their gender, right? This is sometimes what's visible to other people. So your style, your behavior, your voice, your mannerisms, your body language, and then some things that are not visible, which would be pronouns, nicknames, interests, things like that. And finally, when we're talking about sexuality, this is emotional. This includes emotional, romantic, and or physical attraction, right? So when somebody is talking about being gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, or heterosexual, that would be sexuality. And we're gonna talk a little bit more using our friend, the gender unicorn here, which is one of my favorite ways to talk about gender, and it's something I often use with clients. But in this, in this topic, what I really want you to understand is that if someone is kind of in the beginning stages of coming out, and maybe they don't have clarity yet, that is not pathology, right? Their identity development it's not a linear process, as we're going to talk more about later. And so it's okay if someone doesn't quite know yet what words or what labels best describe them. That's absolutely normal and not a problem. All right, so our next slide is going to show our adorable gender unicorn. And as I said, this is something I like to pull up with clients because it really does such a good job. I'm such a visual person. Many of my clients are very visual learners as well. And here we can see that in the gender unicorn, you can see the little rainbow in the thought bubble represents gender identity, which can include male, female, or other genders. Gender expression, right? What's visible to other people can be masculine, feminine, or other. Sex assigned at birth, which is those physical sex characteristics, can be male, female, intersex, or other. And then the little hearts in the middle of the unicorn represent physical attraction or emotional attraction to women, men, or other genders. So again, anyone can use this. It doesn't have to be someone that's part of the LGBTQ plus community. And you might learn a little bit more about your gender expression or your gender identity. All right, so moving on, we're going to learn a little bit about sexuality, right? We talked a little bit about gender. Now we're going to talk about sexuality. So as I mentioned, sexuality includes emotional attraction, romantic attraction, and or physical attraction. In the 1940s, there was a research team that worked at the Institute for Sex Research, and they interviewed thousands of people about their sexual histories. They wanted to learn more. And they were looking to understand sexual behavior, thoughts, feelings towards the same or opposite sex. And what they found was that people did not often fit into these very clear-cut categories, right? It wasn't just as simple to say, this person is heterosexual or bisexual or homosexual. They found that it was a little bit more fluid than that. It was a little bit more nuanced than that. And based on that, they developed this scale. And the Kinsey scale, as it was called, has 7 points. I've also seen it actually with an X all the way to the left before the 0. That represents people who are asexual, that don't have sexual contact or relations or interest in that. And then the 0 to 6 represents kind of varying degrees, right? All the way to the left, we have exclusively heterosexual, and all the way to the right, we have exclusively homosexual. And these are the terms that they were using at the time. And in the middle was kind of a degree but could be bisexuality, right? We might understand it that way today. So in their terms, if you were a 3, you were you had equal heterosexual and homosexual attractions, right? It's really important to note that this scale, it does not capture or address all the possibilities that exist. It was created in the 1940s. A lot has changed since then. And even since then, there have been 2 other representations of sexuality that have come out or that have been created: the Klein Sexual Orientation Grid and the Storms Scale. And these kind of further address this idea of like bisexuality or asexuality. And I would really encourage, if that's something that you're interested in, you can do a little bit of research and learn a bit more. They're a bit more detailed than the Kinsey scale. I want to take a moment, if you would like to put in if you feel comfortable sharing, or just thinking about, you don't need to write anything, but to think about what messages you grew up hearing about gender and sexuality, right? We've all had such different experiences and grew up in different cultures or environments. And so I really want you to just reflect throughout the talk of the messages that you heard growing up. And so if you want to share in the comments, or if you want to just think about it, that's totally fine. Yeah, that they only exist in a binary, men, women, straight, gay. Yeah, I attended a really wonderful training by the Yes Institute, which their information's at the end of this presentation. That talks a lot about that. All right, thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so going on to our next slide. Actually, in the research process, in the preparation process for this talk, I came across some, I guess, new information about the difference between the term coming out, which maybe most people or many people are familiar with, and the term inviting in. And this was really important. And so I actually was adding this in at the last possible moment because I really wanted to offer this other perspective when we're talking about what coming out even is or what inviting in even is. And so when we think about coming out, that term is often used to refer to the process of telling someone else, how do I identify in terms of my romantic orientation, my sexual orientation, my gender identity? It's seen as a lifelong process. There's intrapersonal parts, meaning there's a coming out within myself process that happens, and then coming out to other people. And this has been the way that we've referred to this process for a long time. Um, Recently, there has been some discourse around this concept of inviting in rather than coming out. And inviting in is a little bit different, right? It is a bit of a newer concept that was created by this Australian scholar and therapist in an article that she wrote about her own experience, I believe, as a queer Muslim woman. And she talks about inviting in is the conscious and selective invitation of people into your own club of life, right? I'm inviting people into my experience. And that's really what we're going to talk about. How do we create an environment and knowledge and awareness and competence so that people feel comfortable enough inviting in or sharing parts of themselves with other people? The reason why this is important is that, many queer teens experience rejection, they experience housing instability, they might be forced to leave their homes after coming out. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. But I really want to invite you to think about how maybe coming out is a bit of a dated concept, and we can start to think about using the term inviting in, which really centers the lives and the experiences of the LGBTQ plus community, right? Um, and it shifts the power dynamic a little bit, right? We live in a culture where maybe heterosexuality and being cisgender is the norm or is the expectation. And so when we shift the language that we're using, it helps to shift the power dynamic. It helps to center, these are the stories and the lives and the emotions of the people that are going through this process. And so why shouldn't we center their experience? All right. So going on to our next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how coming out or inviting in, right, whatever term you decide to use, it is not a one-time event, right? Oh, and I see that there's some great comments in the chat, and I'm going to look over those as well, because I think it's so important, and I appreciate everybody sharing their experiences because it really is so important to use your voice when it comes to this. So coming out is not a one-time event, right? I don't just come out of the closet, so to speak, or just tell people, I'm queer or I'm gay or I'm lesbian and I'm done, right? This is a multi-step, non-linear process. There's a lot of factors that play a role. And the way that I sometimes look at it is more of a process of unfolding rather than I came out and that's it, I'm done, right? It's a little bit of a lengthier process than that. So when we are thinking about internally, someone might start to come out, right, to themselves or start to wonder of their own experiences. They kind of might start to wonder, yeah, is it possible that I might be a lesbian or gay or bisexual or trans? And they might experience some denial, some confusion within themselves at this point. And it's not really a conversation that's happening with other people at that point. It's something that's happening internally. Then they might start to be open to the possibility as they move into comparison that, okay, could be possible that this might be part of my identity. I'm not sure. It's still very inner process, right? Internal process. It's not happening with other people. As we move into tolerance and acceptance, that's when, I might have started to realize something about my identity, and I may start to share or open up to others. There is no your identity and your experience is just as valid, even if you never come out of the closet or if you never share that publicly, right? But at this point, this process was created in 1976, and it just kind of helped give us some words and understanding of what might be going on. As we go into the pride and integration part of the process. Pride is this, once I've accepted, I've not only tolerated this may be part of me, I've accepted that this may be part of me, and then it becomes the most important part of me. I want everyone to know, right? I want maybe to go to the parades and I want to be in the community and I want to go out and I want to just really be open about my identity. And as we move into integration, it's not that this part of us becomes less important, but it becomes just as important, and other parts of ourselves are just as important as this part of our identity, right? We see a more holistic integration of that sense of self, and that's very important, right? Where this is a part of me, but there's other things that are important about me too, and I'm not only identifying myself through my sexual orientation or my gender identity. There's other parts of what make me me. We're going to talk a little bit about why do people move back and forth through the stages. Again, not a linear process. It's presented this way for us to understand, but we really are going to see that people can move back and forth through this for a variety of factors. I also want, before we go to the next slide, to just really point out that there are some challenges that are unique to transgender and non-binary folks that might make coming out or inviting in very challenging and very risky for them. And so things such as employment, housing, access to affirming healthcare, the legal system, family dynamics, might make it very, very challenging, especially for those members of the community. And other high-risk populations, meaning they might experience a lot of risk or lack of safety in this process, would be folks that have disabilities, folks that are very young or elderly, folks that are part of the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color, those who have been victims of hate crimes. So there could be a variety of reasons that someone may not feel comfortable or safe coming out. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about how does this manifest in our mental health challenges, both for the individual who is engaged in this coming out process, for themselves and their identity, and for those around them, right? Their family, their community, and the larger culture. So for the individual, there can be high levels of anxiety, there can be high levels of depression, they can really develop internalized shame. They can deal with that rejection sensitivity being really worried of how they're going to be received by the people around them. They might experience identity fragmentation, right? Like not a very clear sense of self. And they might experience some fatigue related to they're constantly advocating for themselves, right? Advocating for being able to be who they are and be true to their identity. For the family, it can be just as challenging. There can be grief. There can be a sense of loss because of, the expectations that I had for my child or my family member, the hopes that I had for them maybe don't match what I'm envisioning anymore. There can be confusion, there can be denial, fear, right, as to how is this person going to be received or treated by others. I really think of it in terms of like the stages of grief, right? There's like bargaining, there's grief, there's anger, and then ideally there's acceptance. Religion and religious conflict can play a role for the family and for some of the emotions that come up for them. Um, there can be concerns about housing, about finances, how is this person's going to be impacted? And culturally, right, there can just be a lack of affirming care providers. There might not be too many doctors or other providers that have a lot of information on how to properly take care of a client or a patient or someone that they're working with who's part of the LGBTQ plus community. And so it doesn't just become about identity, it becomes this chronic sense of invalidation and stress, and it can become very, very overwhelming. Um, I would say that the highest risks that I think about here are things like homelessness, especially for youth who may not have a way to pay for, rent on their own. And also things like conversion therapy can be, the conversion therapy is the process of trying to change someone's um, gender or sexuality. And it is not recommended by, any of the major groups. So, for example, the APA, anyone that is focused from a mental health perspective, it's not recommended as a helpful approach. But it does happen. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the mental health challenges. So we're going to go on and talk about minority stress and trauma-informed care and how, what are some protective factors? That's very important. Okay, how are we doing on time? Okay, I think we're doing well. So when we're talking about the stressors, the same way that coming out could be an internal process and an interpersonal process, there can be internal stressors and external stressors. External stressors are things like discrimination, stigma, rejection, unsafe systems, and that can put a lot of pressure, right, on the individual. These are these external things that are happening that are putting pressure on the individual person that lead to feelings of shame, concealment, hypervigilance, fear of disclosure, and all of that can culminate in a negative mental health impact in the anxiety, depression, trauma, and isolation that we were discussing previously. The good news, right, what we have learned about trauma is that as much as we need to focus on the trauma in itself or the stressors in itself, knowing the strengths, the protective factors, having all of those things that are listed there, affirming care, family support, community belonging, developing emotional and behavioral skills, maybe through therapy, those things are just as important and really give the person strength and resilience to go through this process of kind of coming to terms with their identity and sharing it with others. And so when we talk about trauma-informed care, there are certain factors that have been listed that say this is what trauma-informed care is. So if you're going to therapy or you're going to a doctor's office, on the bottom here, it talks about safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, peer support or community support, collaboration. For me, that's one of, they're all important, but I'm really big on collaboration. in my sessions with my clients. I want you to be a part of the process because that is the most important thing. Empowerment is so important. The person having a voice and having the autonomy to make their own choices, extremely important, right? Part of our ethics as therapists is do no harm, and also knowing and respecting the autonomy of the people that you're working with. And this is super important in trauma-informed care. And then being able to consider those cultural, historic, and gender issues that we've been talking about. So when we're looking at the coming out process from a trauma-informed lens, right, we might recognize when someone's rejected, that can create an attachment wound, right? When someone has to hide who they are, they're worried that someone else is going to out them without their consent. That creates chronic hypervigilance, right? That person is at this heightened level of stress, and this is affecting their mental health. So again, I want you to think about these protective factors and what are the things maybe that you've seen that have made someone in your life feel safe enough to be fully known. And maybe this is in terms of their sexual and gender identity, and maybe it's in terms of something else that they want to share, right? That they have felt comfortable sharing. What are the things that make you have made you feel safe enough to share with others, right? And so that's something you can go ahead and put in the chat. Acceptance, support, providing safety. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if there's some other ones here. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. Respect. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So moving on to our next slide. Thank you so much. We have talked a lot about the stressors and the challenges and, some of the things that folks have had to overcome throughout their coming out process. But I really want you to walk away with strategies and with skills and with kind of practical things that can be helpful. So for the individual, right, for the person who is coming out or sharing their identity or learning something about their identity, it is so important to have self-validation, right? That's also one of the things that I work on with my clients, with all of my clients, regardless of their gender, identity, or sexuality. My identity is real, even if no one else understands it, even if no one else accepts it, it's still real. And I need to be able to have this really strong internal sense of self so that whatever barriers or challenges I face, I know I can be okay, right? And I can find people that will support me because I have that sense of self. Distress tolerance, which is, I talk about this all the time in with my clients. Can I get through this moment without making it worse? That's it. That's all that distress tolerance is. I don't have to solve the problem. I don't have to feel better about it. I just need to get through this moment without making it worse right now. And then grounding skills, so things like EFT tapping, weighted blankets, being out in nature, meditation, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All of these things to kind of ground us in our environment and take us out of our head when it can be an anxious place sometimes. Boundary setting, right? So for the person to be able to set boundaries around questions that they're answering, timing of those conversations, location of those conversations, and access to, personal information. One of the things that's very important is knowing that coming out can be a gradual process, right? That's really what I want to emphasize here tonight is it's not all or nothing. It's not a one-time deal. It can be little by little, and that is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And then most importantly, I would say for the individual is safety planning, knowing who can I talk to, where can I go in case of an argument or an emergency, or I'm being forced out of my home. What's my backup plan? I need to have those affirming spaces or social support, a support system that I can go to for help. And when we talk about therapy recommendations, right, we're talking about coming out in mental health specifically. Therapy, specifically EMDR, can be extremely helpful for folks that are dealing with trauma. So that stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. Then we have narrative therapy that is about rewriting your own story using your empowered voice. And then IFS, or internal family systems, that's something that I've been really interested in lately. And IFS is about accessing your undamaged, compassionate inner self, right? Your wise self, your highest self, however you want to call it. And that part of you that everyone has knows how to heal, and it can help foster inner leadership so that when a part of me is anxious, or a part of me is sad, or a part of me is overworking because that's all I know, that's the only way I know how to cope, or a part of me is drinking or using drugs, then it's very important to have that strong sense of inner self, because that can become self-leadership. And it helps with our interconnectedness and outer connectedness. And it heals those different parts of ourselves that may be suffering. Okay, so I really wanted to offer today some local resources, so feel free to take a screenshot of these. These are all based, of course, we have our lovely NAMI support group, our LGBTQIA plus connection support group that NAMI offers, which is a great resource. And we have so many other resources. The Yes Institute is lovely. They do great trainings, very culturally aware trainings as well. We have SunServe, PRISM, the Aqua Foundation, Jewish Community Services, and the Alliance for LGBTQ Youth. And these are just some resources that I happen to know and love. Okay, next slide. For families, right? I really want to emphasize that while coming out for the person that is part of the LGBT community can be hard, it can also be very, very challenging for the family. And I want to extend a lot of empathy for that. And so these are just some ways that the family might be able to navigate this process a little bit easier. The main thing I would focus on is curiosity and active listening, right? There can be a lot of that fear and anxiety or worry or sadness that we talked about. And the antidote to that always is curiosity. If we can lead with curiosity, we're going to go a lot further. And so we're not trying to control or fix right away. We're really just trying to learn and understand, and kind of reframing, right, from I don't understand at all to how can you help me understand your experience? I would say seeking out affirming resources like some of the ones that I just provided, respecting the person's name, pronouns, and pacing of their coming out process. And most importantly is seeking support in your own process, right? Your feelings are valid, your reactions are valid, your feelings are valid, and sometimes we need to separate our reactions from those feelings. But we still deserve, the family still deserves a space to process their own feelings and experiences, and how this is impacting them. But I really liked this idea that support does not require perfect understanding before compassionate action. So if we can lean into compassion, if we can lean into curiosity, if we can lean into active, non-judgmental listening, it might allow for connection throughout what could be a challenging time. Okay. So before we wrap up for the night, let's see. I have one activity that I would love if you all could kind of follow along. And on your own piece of paper, or on your phone, or wherever you can jot stuff down, I'm going to ask you to write down those 5 things, right? The name of a friend, someone that you know, the name of a family member, the name of a hobby or a passion that you have, a material possession that you wouldn't want to lose, and a dream job. I'm going to give you just a moment to write those things down. And I'm going to ask you to please follow along. I'm going to ask you to imagine for this activity that you are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or pansexual. If you already identify with one of these identities, you have a choice. You can choose a different identity and follow along. You can imagine it in this person's shoes, or you can choose to follow along to whatever degree that you'd like. So I'm going to go through and read a little story, and I'm going to ask that you just imagine this list, keep that list in front of you as I read through. So imagine that you're a little boy and you're hanging out with that number one friend on your list, that number one person. You're watching cartoons and you say that you love Batman. Your number one person asks you, what do you mean by that? You try to explain that you really love Batman. That friend calls you a homophobic insult or slur and tells you that he can't hang out with you anymore. Mark that person off of your list. Fast forward to high school. Your feelings of attraction to people of the same sex have not gone away, and you've started to explore them secretly in relationships. You decide to tell one of your closest family members that you're dating someone and that you're gay. They tell you that you're going through a phase and tell you to break up with that person. You explain to them that it's not a phase, but when you tell them that, they refuse to speak to you any longer. You even worry that you might have to leave home. Cross number 2 off of your list. A little further down the road, you're in college now and life has gotten a little better. You've found a community of people to hang out with who support you and care for you. They accept you for who you are. One day, you see a sign for a student organization meeting for that number 3 hobby or passion on your list. You decide to check it out and go to the meeting. Afterwards, the president of the organization comes up to you and introduces himself. He asks you if he saw you in a gay pride parade on campus recently, if that was you. You say yes, and you excitedly describe the event that you were involved with. He tells you that he respects your right to do what you want, but that the other members of the group may not feel comfortable with you around. He asks you not to come back. Mark number 3 off of your list. After you leave the meeting, you come back to your room to find that a homophobic slur has been written on your door and your room has been broken into. That number 4 thing has been destroyed. Mark that off your list. Finally, later in life, you've managed to get your ideal job and life is pretty good. You're at work one day and you have a picture of your partner and your child on your desk. Your boss walks by and asks about them. You tell your boss who they are and she says great and goes on with her day. The next morning, you get called to a meeting where your boss tells you that the company is downsizing and they'll have to let you go. Mark that job off of your list. So, while this story is not meant to be a picture of every single LGBTQ plus person's story, or even most people's story, it can happen and it does happen. This is a particularly tragic story, but it's not overly dramatic. And so it's really important to realize that these sorts of things can happen to people. And just, internally or maybe in the chat, I want you to kind of reflect on how this person's environment and relationships influenced the difficulty of their coming out experience. Or maybe just some thoughts or initial reactions that you had walking through this story. All right, as we're wrapping up today, I'm going to go to our national resources. So I wanted to provide as well as some local resources, some national resources as well, including the Trevor Project, Save LGBT, Sage USA, PFLAG, Gender Diversity, Gender Spectrum, and WPATH, which is more for professionals. There's a lot of great recommendations on there. And after today, I hope that you can continue thinking about creating a compassionate space so that people can feel comfortable sharing important parts of themselves when they choose. Coming out is not just about identity, it is about safety, belonging, and being seen. And mental health support is not about changing who someone is, but about helping them survive and thrive in a world that doesn't always make space for them. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you so much for listening. And I really appreciate all of you being here.
Okay, Melissa, thank you so much for such a great presentation. We have so much to talk about now, but I loved how, yeah, it's always hard to find the right phrase, but it was well-rounded from various points of view, the impact that your gender identity has on your mental health, on your day-to-day life, and on those around you, is so important. One thing I do want to mention, NAMI is a good resource. We have a LGBTQ support group for people with mental health conditions, and we can put the information on that in the chat. If you go to NAMI.org, our national website, there is also additional resources there. So we want everyone to take a look at those specifically. Oh, there we go. That's about the support group specifically for the LGBTQ community. So I think, from the point of view of NAMI, one, we serve people who live with mental health conditions and their loved ones. So not specific to people in the LGBTQ plus community, because mental health and mental illness can affect anyone. As we know, 1 in 4 people live with a mental health condition. But when you talk about the additional issues and stressors that come around gender identity and especially those early stages, and a question I had is there an average length of time for people,
Mm,
like, but when they start thinking about this and when they feel all the way comfortable
mhm.
um, to invite in completely? Is
Mhm.
there we have a statistic around that in mental illness, but I don't know if there's one.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a
Okay.
statistic, but I imagine that it's directly related to how much safety the person is able to access, right? If they have
Sure,
a safe family system, if they have a safe community, if they have um, resources that allow them to really feel that sense of safety and comfort, they might be able to
sure.
work through some of those internal and external processes a bit easier or a bit faster.
Okay, so that's interesting. So, with mental illness, the average time that it takes from the time maybe you're diagnosed or it's suggested to you or a loved one they have a mental health condition, and the time that you fully accept and get treatment for it is 11 years.
Wow.
So, which I was just thinking as you were talking, I mean, that, I wouldn't be surprised if it's around that, but when we talk about the effect on mental health, and we want, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat. You're getting some real accolades here. Thank you. You're an amazing presenter, intelligent and compassionate. Amazing presentation, very helpful. But if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I think for me, it was clear that how and why anxiety and depression would certainly be exacerbated depending on that setting that you're in.
Mhm.
Um, so, can you talk a little bit about that, the impact of maybe what it feels like when you're living with a secret or you feel that you're not normal, um, and the impact that that might have on anxiety or on depression?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when we're approaching that question from a trauma-informed approach, right? I talked a little bit about how that rejection can create an attachment wound or hypervigilance around, okay, how am I presenting myself? What do people know about me? What do people not know about me? And that can create a lot of um, rumination, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress and worry, and feelings of isolation, right? Which we know that when we're feeling isolated, that's really when our mental health suffers. And so the importance of community, the importance of affirming spaces, even if it's just one person, right? I have one person that I can talk to about how I'm feeling or what I'm struggling with. That is the most important.
Thank you so much. Okay, now we have some great
Yeah.
questions in the chat. So, is it normal to feel grief or loss after coming out, even when the response is positive?
Mhm. Yeah, that's such a great question. Absolutely. Absolutely, because it's such a, right, when you've shared that information about yourself, even if it's received positively, which is wonderful if you have that positive um reaction, it is still the loss of this is how I thought things were, this is how the other person thought things were going to be. And I can feel a sense of loss or disconnection related to that. Um, I was also, as I was preparing for this, reading stories of people who had felt so much anticipatory anxiety about having these conversations with their family or with a friend. And then their family and friend were like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, we kind of knew that about you. But there was still so much anxiety prior to that, and that emotion doesn't have anywhere to go. And so, yeah, of course you might feel some
We have
grief,
that
loss.
letdown. Yeah, that
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. All right. Now we have another question. Can you explain an attachment wound?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about attachment, um, at the core, it's the attachment between a child and their primary caregiver, right? So we're thinking about a child and maybe a parent, for example. And that's how we learn how to be in relationship with others. And so I know now there has been so much talk about anxious attachment and avoidant attachment, all these different attachment styles. You can even take a quiz probably to figure out your attachment style. But an attachment wound is when there's some sort of hurt, grief, loss that happens within that relationship, because we form our initial attachment with that primary caregiver, but that is almost like a blueprint of then how we interact with everyone else in the world. And so if we feel that rejection from that person who's your primary parent or your primary caregiver, it can really impact the way that you show up in other relationships.
Okay. Very interesting. Now the chat is very busy all of a sudden. So someone asked what all the different flags are. I'm thinking that what we'll do is put that slide up at the end and we can have a little quiz and make a
Great.
game out of that, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
kind of fun. Let me see. I have to go up a little bit. Okay. Now, this is an interesting comment, and I was thinking about this during the presentation also. It's important to note that the DSM used to have LGBTQ as a mental illness.
Hmm.
So it was updated in 1973, 74, which again is not that long ago. I was 14 when that
Hmm.
happened. And so my childhood, I was taught that, yeah, this is very far from normal. Um, right. The community has to deal with older generations like me. But but we were taught that, but it's not that I don't think everyone believed that because and even being raised in the Catholic Church, it just wasn't the feedback that I got. But maybe
Yeah.
that was just my family. So then the next question, what role does community play in mental health outcomes for LGBTQ plus individuals?
Yeah, those are both that was a great comment and a great question. Um, just really quickly going back to this idea of being part of the LGBTQ plus community being related to mental illness, right? There's has been throughout the history of psychology and mental health, um, so much misunderstanding and stigma when it comes to any kind of minority community. So not only the LGBT community, but even women were thought to be hysterical, and that was like a mental health diagnosis, right? So absolutely, all of this kind of all the research has been done on straight, right? Heterosexual, cisgendered men, really, when we think about what the majority of research has been conducted on. Um, so there's absolutely a generational difference between what, the AIDS crisis, how that impacted the community. That's actually why the L in LGBT is the first letter, because the lesbians were the first ones to go in and say, we're going to support, the gay men in our community. It really doesn't matter. Um, but there's all these generational traumas that have happened and get carried down, and so there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. But it can be difficult when even within the community, within different generations, there's such varied experiences. And then going to the question about community and mental health outcomes, I think when part of your identity has been or might be rejected by family, friends, workplace, religion. There's this idea within the queer community that you have chosen family, not blood family. And so that becomes resilience, that becomes a way of finding joy and hope. Is so I think community is very important, especially within the LGBT plus community.
Absolutely. And oh shoot, there's something I was going to say. Now I can't.
Yeah.
Um, darn it. It was important. I know it. But all right, let's go. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think. Oh, I know what it was. Okay. So as far as community goes, and actually all of our interactions, and what we do at NAMI is educate people on these topics. So we want everyone to know that this video of this presentation is going to be online on our YouTube channel probably around the middle of next week. It takes us a little time to edit it out. So when that comes up, we will let you all know. And we would ask, especially, if this is something that's really important for you to share with your own family or community. So share the link to that video. So then, they can get this great objective presentation and we can continue to enlighten our entire community. We have the comment from Lisa that supportive community is life-saving, and I think we can all definitely agree with that. So now I know we're at time, but can we just go to that slide with the flags, and we'll just go through them real quick and play a game with that. Okay, we're going to start right here. The first one, can we put a cursor on? Yeah. Um, yeah, the one that's closest to resources. Yeah. What is that? What do we think that is? Regular
Yeah.
pride flag. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Next to that,
Who knows the pink, blue, and white? Yeah.
trans.
Transgender
Okay. All
pride.
right. Next to that,
And we have the pink, purple, and yep.
pan. Okay, boy.
Yeah. Pink,
Okay.
yellow.
Below that, then let's go down. Yeah, that's pansexual. Okay.
Okay. I think we're looking at the purple,
With
yellow,
the
white, and black one. Yeah. Does anyone know what that one is?
We have one person that said inclusive.
Non-binary. Yep.
Not non-binary. Okay.
Y'all
And
are
then
educated. I love
in the
this.
middle there, what's that one?
Bisexual. Yes.
Wow. All right. This one I've seen a lot, but to be honest, oh,
Mhm.
I think I know what it is. Oh,
Yep. The new progress pride flag. Very.
okay. All right. That, but the lower one,
Then we have purple, white, gray, and black. Yeah, asexual.
asexual. Okay. And next to that,
Then the lesbian. I love this. You all know
is
your
that
flag.
what that is?
Yeah, that's the lesbian flag, lesbian pride
I
flag.
did not know that. Okay. All right. And this last one, the yellow with the purple circle, intersex. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that is correct.
Wow.
Excellent. 100%. A plus. Great job, everyone.
Oh, look at that. Okay. Yeah, we have some real scholars on here. So,
We
okay.
sure do.
Thank you again, Melissa. Thank you to the NAMI team, to Eileen and Sophia, sorry. And then we have some of our other team members on the call, Lisa Lesueur and Brittany Benjamin, who are also doing work in this community. So thanks all of you for being there. Remember to reach out to NAMI if you need support, if you need information, we are always here for you. And thanks everyone for being on the call.
Thank you all so much.